Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking a seriously complex, intensely emotional primary source document today. It's a deeply personal letter written by a man named Jeremy to his brother Ben. And honestly, it is a raw, totally unflinching account of childhood trauma, the crushing weight of toxic family dynamics, and that agonizingly painful but necessary process of estrangement. So you might be wondering, why does this matter to us? Well, understanding this kind of dynamic actually helps us recognize the universal signs of trauma bonds in our own lives. It's heavy stuff for sure, but by breaking down this text, we can gain a truly profound understanding of how these bonds form and ultimately how they break.
Right out of the gate, Jeremy hits us with this stark, unavoidable opening line, "I want and need to tell you some things that are going to hurt and be confusing." I mean, talk about setting the emotional stakes, right? He's not writing this to reconcile. He is writing to lay out a reality that has literally been ignored for decades. He's laying the groundwork for a major confrontation. He's preparing his brother, and us really, for a journey through some incredibly dark memories.
So let's start with phase one, the roots of resentment.
To really understand how this relationship ended, we have to look at how it began. The environment these brothers grew up in, it wasn't just, slightly dysfunctional. It was violently abusive. But there's this massive, tragic irony in how they each experienced it. On one hand, you have Jeremy, who felt entirely powerless. He was actually begging their father to stop abusing Ben. He even went so far as to punch their father to try and protect his older brother. But then, look at Ben's reaction. Instead of seeing Jeremy as an ally, Ben completely misdirected his intense anger. He physically pushed Jeremy away, angrily claiming Jeremy got away with murder simply because Jeremy wasn't the one taking the physical beatings. Ben completely resented him for surviving the abuse unharmed, missing the fact that Jeremy was suffering the immense, crushing emotional trauma of watching it happen, while being totally powerless to stop it.
And this dynamic created what Jeremy refers to as a schism between them, a profound, deep-seated divide. He shares this absolutely devastating memory to highlight this. He remembers being in church, laying his head on his brother's lap. What should have been this safe, comforting moment turned into a nightmare. Ben actually derived pleasure from plucking Jeremy's hairs out, one by one, while giggling. Psychologically speaking, this is a classic trauma response, right? The abused older brother regaining a false sense of power by inflicting pain on the younger one. For Jeremy, realizing that his own brother took pleasure in hurting him, well, it planted a seed of deep mistrust and anger that would basically define their entire relationship moving forward.
Moving on to phase two, desperate bids for connection. As they moved into adolescence and young adulthood, Jeremy didn't just give up on his brother. Actually, he engaged in these frantic, constantly evolving attempts to win Ben's love and just bridge that agonizing divide. Step one, he tried being the perfect kid. He figured, hey, if I set a good example, Ben won't have any reason to push me away. And by the way, changing your identity to appease an abuser and avoid rejection, that's a well-documented psychological trauma response known as fawning. But when that completely failed and Ben just resented him more, Jeremy pivoted to step two. He started acting out, smoking and drinking behind Ben's back, trying to prove he wasn't so perfect, hoping they could finally relate. And when that didn't work either, he moved to step three, self-deprecation. He learned to be the fastest one in the room to point out his own flaws, just hoping to soften the inevitable blow of rejection. He was constantly shifting his very identity, desperately searching for the one version of himself that his brother could actually love.
And this heavy emotional toll, it literally followed Jeremy everywhere. That childhood abuse and all that misplaced blame clung to him when he moved in with relatives, Pete and Mira. While living there, the stress actually manifested physically. Jeremy stopped talking entirely for a year and even developed Tourette's. Later on, he joined the Marine Corps looking for some kind of structure, but that deep sense of isolation just followed right along with him. He'd watch other recruits getting letters and calls from supportive families, and it just cut him deeply. When Ben finally did show up to Jeremy's boot camp graduation, he arrived drunk, making Jeremy's huge achievement all about himself. Desperate for any kind of connection, Jeremy fell into heavy drinking and eventually made the incredibly drastic choice to abandon his post. He rushed back home to try and fix Ben, hoping that if he saved his brother would finally love him back.
Which brings us to phase three, mirroring toxic behavior.
But here's the thing. Fixing Ben was a total illusion. And this leads to what is arguably the darkest psychological turn in the entire letter. Realizing that neither being the good guy nor being the savior was working, Jeremy makes this conscious, honestly twisted decision to adopt his brother's toxic traits. He asks himself this tragic, logical question. If me being good was so damn wrong, why not be like you so at least you would love me? He had returned home only to have Ben steal from him, smoke crack in his car, and literally steal his girlfriends and friends. Faced with a brother who claimed to love him while deliberately destroying his life, Jeremy's moral compass just completely inverted.
Jeremy actually breaks down the psychology of a victim choosing to mirror their abuser, which is a dynamic really closely tied to reactive abuse. He writes, "I figured since you were so correct in your estimation of my wrongs that perhaps it would be perfectly understandable and fine to present those same hurts to you." He figured since Ben already viewed him as the bad guy, he might as well act the part. So, Jeremy started gossiping about Ben, sleeping with his girlfriend, taking whatever he wanted. In his mind, these actions were totally justified because, well, Ben was doing them anyway. It's a chilling explanation of how toxic cycles perpetuate themselves. Jeremy became the very thing that hurt him, purely to find some kind of twisted common ground with his brother.
Next is Phase 4, the breaking point.
Eventually, this entire toxic cycle had to collapse. Out of dire financial need, Jeremy made a commitment to try one last time, reaching out and agreeing to move in with Ben. He promised to be respectful of Ben's home, but instead of peace, he walked into an absolute nightmare. The environment was completely saturated with heavy drug use and severe paranoia. The main accusation Ben constantly hurled at Jeremy during this time was gaslighting, manipulating someone into questioning their own sanity or reality. Ben, who was consumed by his own anger and likely drug-induced psychosis, became utterly convinced that Jeremy was part of these elaborate plots against him, forcing Jeremy to question his own sanity every single day.
The situation deteriorated so incredibly fast into absolute chaos. I mean, we're talking about Ben's friends actively robbing Jeremy, Ben threatening him with baseball bats to force confessions for things Jeremy wasn't even doing. There were wild accusations of gang stalking, government conspiracies to implant voices in Ben's head. Ben would even come into Jeremy's room in the middle of the night just to terrorize him, which eerily echoed the abuse from their childhood. And the absolute last straw? A moment of sheer, unimaginable horror where Ben bit a glass meth pipe in half and threatened to stab Jeremy to death if he didn't admit to gaslighting him. Jeremy was literally trapped in a house of horrors.
This leads to Phase 5, redefining love and family.
At this point, Jeremy had absolutely no choice but to flee for his life. He moved to Texas, severing ties. And it's during this escape that Jeremy experiences a profound realization that completely changes his worldview. Once he was in Texas, finally out of the chaos, Jeremy started interacting with just everyday people. And the contrast between his past and present realities is mind-blowing. His entire life, his family's definition of love meant being treated like garbage, enduring endless chaos, and facing literal threats of violence. But in Texas, complete strangers offered him comfort, quietness, patience, basic manners. The deep, painful irony here is that absolute strangers provided the genuine care, safety, and respect that Jeremy's own family completely failed to give him.
He captures the heartbreak of this realization perfectly, writing, "It just seemed normal that family was supposed to treat one another like shit and that the kindness we're supposed to show strangers is manners." I mean, wow. For his entire life, Jeremy's understanding of the word love was completely tainted. Strangers basically had to teach him what patience and comfort looked like without ever even using the word love.
Finally, we arrive at Phase 6, the final boundary.
Even all the way in Texas, Jeremy still felt that gaping hole of having no family. He actually tried calling to re-establish a relationship, only to be met with the exact same hurt and blame. He realized he was caught in this totally unwinnable trap, a complete hypocrisy of contact. His family accused him of being selfish for moving away. But if he called, he was told he was being selfish for not being considerate of their time. If he actually went home, he was threatened with death. Even if he tried to do something as simple as read the Bible, he was told he was reading it wrong. There was literally no action he could take that wouldn't be weaponized against him. Severing ties wasn't just a casual choice anymore. It was a matter of pure, absolute survival.
And so he lays down this devastating final boundary. I don't see a place for you in my life anymore. Not even by choice, but sadly out of pure necessity. He actually admits he feels physically sick writing it. He still feels lingering guilt, and he even takes responsibility for the hurt his brother endured. But he also acknowledges his own deep anger. He accepts that he will never replace Ben as his brother, but he has to learn to fulfill his own needs, even if that means relying on strangers to do it.
Jeremy's letter is just such a harrowing journey. From a desperate need for a brother's validation to the incredibly painful acceptance that some bonds simply have to be broken to survive, it really forces us to look closely at our own definitions of obligation and care. So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to reflect on.
When the people who are supposed to love you the most cause you the absolute deepest harm, what does it truly mean to define family on your own terms?